All right, guys, we're actually live right now. I know that a lot of people are still logging in. We had to switch our location of the live meeting here, but as you're logging in, we'll give you a few minutes to do that. All right, guys, we're actually live right now. I know that a lot of people, there you go, started echoing on us. But I'm here with Mandy, my beautiful wife, and then also with Lori Adams Brown. She's one of our pastors at Echo. At the Sunnyvale location, and we're going to be talking about immigration in just a few minutes together. And I know so many of you that are logging in, you've already posted some questions online on YouTube. If you haven't yet, go ahead and post it now. And then you can also upvote some of the questions that you have, and we're going to be addressing the ones that came in first ahead of time. I know so many of you already submitted a ton of questions about immigration, and we're so excited to be able to connect with you on some of these. So hot topics today. We have one day to election day, so a lot of stuff going on right now. Maybe some people are tuning in, Lori, because they're trying to still make up their mind on who to vote for, and this is like
no chance to influence. This is great.
Hey, before we dive in, Lori, I think it'd be cool for people to know like where your heart came from within this topic, because I know your mom also is involved with this. Can you give us a little bit of a glimpse of your story in regards to immigration?
Sure. Yes. Well, I've been an immigrant outside the U.S. most of my life. I recently returned to the country of my citizenship about a year ago here in the U.S. But I spent most of my life in South America, growing up in Venezuela with a year in Costa Rica, and then came to college in the States, did a master's here, and then lived in Asia for 20 years in Indonesia and Singapore. So I understand what it means to get a visa and a place that's hard to get that sometimes. I've been on work visas, I've been on a dependent visa, I've been on all kinds of things. And I have been very, very well welcomed as an immigrant everywhere I've ever gone. Welcome to people into people's homes. I've eaten lots of food. I've been to weddings. I've just been accepted so well. And my mom and dad, they came to the US and retired here. But before they retired, my mom was the director of border health for New Mexico, working for the governor. And her job took her into Mexico and on the border just for a lot of different reasons. And even though she's retired, she's still working to help with volunteers as immigrants come out of the detention centers because they live still there near the border. And she does a massive feeding program through her church every week. And they're just always there welcoming people with warm blankets and counseling and translation. And so, yeah, I just, my family is very involved currently in the situation that's happening on the US-Mexico border. And I just feel like we should be welcoming people here like we were so welcomed overseas.
That's awesome. Well, if you're just tuning in, we're starting a Q&A tonight about immigration, refugees, asylum seekers, all that whole topic of build a wall, not build a wall, and what do we do? And we've been saying even throughout the series that we've been doing at Echo called Separation of Church and Hate, that a lot of these topics, we're trying to propose a third alternative that's not necessarily a political perspective, but it's one that might actually make both sides a little bit mad. and sometimes both sides getting a little uncomfortable is actually what leads us to unity, because usually the right answer is right in the middle, or it's in the middle of the tension that you should hold versus of letting go. And we're going to talk about what that looks like. So if you have questions, you can post it there on YouTube as well. Let us know of those questions. And then we're going to address some that already came in ahead of time as well. And then a quick little plug. If you missed if you're kind of logging in and you're not sure what this is all about, but you might want to check out the rest of the videos on our YouTube page here at Echo.Church that has other Q&As we've done on gender identity, racism, and then all the messages that we've done on Sundays in relation to this. So this past Sunday was the one on immigration, which is why we're doing the Q&A tonight on this topic. So Mandy, you married an immigrant, so that's some of your experience.
That's my main experience.
That's right. So you can add some, I joked on Sunday that I paid you to marry me so I can get a green card. And I was hoping nobody would call immigration on me and turn me in. But anyways, maybe we can dive in if that's all right. Are you ready, Lori?
I'm ready. Let's go.
Oh, hey, I don't want to forget to say this too. A lot of people want more resources on this. And Lori, your podcast was like one of the best resources, even for me as I prepare for my message. And can you just tell people the name and like where to find that? I don't know exactly how that works, but just.
Sure. Yeah. It's available in most places where you find your podcast, Apple and Spotify and a lot of places. It's called A World of Difference. It's a podcast about people who want to make a difference in the world or who just feel different. And we did a whole series on immigration with lots of great speakers. I learned tons and I was very motivated to do more.
That's awesome. All right. So let's go ahead and jump in to our conversation then. We have questions we're going to address and they got upvoted, and we're going to start at the one at the top that has the most votes and kind of work our way. And then if you're live here today, if you have more questions that you want to turn in to us, you're welcome to do that as well. And we'll try our very best to answer them as they come live as well. So the first one, it goes like this. It says, America's a land of immigrants, and I love the different cultures that people bring to this country. However, I believe it is important to vet people wanting to come into this country. Not all people have good intentions, and some of them want to do harm to America. We have the responsibility to protect this country from those who would do her harm. Your comments, please. Lori, I think you should go first on this one.
I love this question. I'm happy to go first. In fact, when I saw this question earlier today, I was flying from Dallas back to San Jose after officiating Stephanie and Hanouk's wedding. Speaking of immigrants, shout out to Stephanie and Hanouk, the newlyweds. He did not pay her either to get married. But yes, my friend Alan Cross, I sent this message to him and asked him, can you guys still hear me? Are you guys there? Are we frozen?
You're okay. I just had to reset something here, but you're good to go. Keep going.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that, YouTubers. Yes, my friend Alan Cross, who's another great resource. He's written a lot about immigration for the New York Times, for different, he's written for the Evangelical Immigration Table and done a lot of lobbying as a pastor in Northern California in Petaluma. I shot this question to him earlier when I was at the Dallas airport and was like, what are your thoughts on this? And he said something that I 100% agree with, which is that, you know, the laws are there. We have laws that vet people. I mean, this is a normal situation around the world where people have laws that vet people. The conversation right now in the United States is largely not around, let's just have zero borders and like Red Rover, come over everybody and nobody's checking anyone. That's largely not the conversation we're having. The conversation we're really having is when we are vetting people, which we are doing, when you come through immigration at an airport, when you come, you know, across the border in the southern part of the United States and from Mexico and Central America into, you know, New Mexico or Texas or Arizona, there is a border and you have to give, you know, information and you have to show documentation if you have it, or you go through an asylum process or whatever that looks like. We currently are doing that. We do that. So that's largely not the conversation. It really is a question of how are we receiving them when they do come? Are we putting them in jails? Are we treating them badly? Are we treating them like criminals? Or are we doing what we have committed to do with the United Nations many years ago, which is to be a part of a process where we accept people and we have a vetting process, which is currently in our system. So I think that's largely what the conversation is about. I would hope that as US citizens, we would do a better job of receiving and welcoming immigrants, because of what I see in the scriptures commanding us to do that over and over. And just because it's the right thing to do. I mean, I was reading in my Bible this morning on the plane, this verse that just scared me. I don't know, do you ever get that fear and trembling when you read something? But it was like, we should treat everyone with kindness because the Lord is near. And in my mind, I just pictured the US border right now where we have people in cages, and to think the Lord is near. Wow, that scares me. It scares me that we are allowing that to happen. So I think that's really the conversation. How are we welcoming them when they come?
Yeah.
And then
really good.
Also making assumptions, right? Like I think sometimes what's happened is we've erred on assuming the worst about everyone coming in versus assuming the best about everyone. And so the vetting process is there. People will, you know, hopefully if it works, like people will go through and they follow the process. But when there's the assumption that everyone has bad, you know, ill intentions, then it makes the process, the vetting process, that much harder. I think for those going through it. And so to err on kindness, that's a good one.
Hey, by the way, if you're just tuning in, I know some of you are just tuning in now. Thanks for coming. We see you, and we hope that you're going to enjoy the Q&A. Post your questions if you have some as well. In fact, take a minute if you're with us and even share this with those in your social media platforms so that more people can join the conversation and be in this important topic with us together as well. So we're addressing a question at a time. Just to add to one comment to this too, on Sunday, I hit on this a little bit in the message, but I really think that our attitude about immigrants is more important than our politics around it. And I know they can go together, but one of the things I've noticed is so many followers of Jesus that they first lead with politics, and they get really uptight to the point where they're forgetting the heart of God in regards to this on both sides, to be honest. Like some of them are build a wall, protect, but they're not first thinking of compassion and love. And some of them are like, welcome everybody. But they're not also thinking of the other people that have a strong opinion about it, and they belittle the people that are against them. Yeah. And it causes a lot of division. And I think one of the mandates of Jesus for us is that really should be the mark of believers is the ability to lead with love and to think of the individual, and to not just think of the politics around all of this and the laws, but to remember, like we talked about, like the amount of asylum seekers on borders right now around the world that are literally running for their lives, moms with babies that are being persecuted, and dads and teenagers that have no home. And sometimes we forget to remember, like, these people really matter to God, and regardless of what we believe about a wall or no wall, our hearts should break with compassion for people that have no place to live, or have even a desperation about where they do live. And that's why they want to get into a better country that we feel entitled to belong to, but really we did very little to be here in this privileged place that we are.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I feel like some of the conversation, did change a few years ago when we were hearing phrases like the country south of the United States is sending their worst. I mean, leaders frame the conversation with their words. And so that kind of put ideas in some people's heads that didn't exist before, assuming there is a nation that's just sending their people to us, which is debatable. I think people are mostly coming because they want to and they need to, and life's not sustainable where they are. That's typically the immigrant story, right? But to assume that they're the worst and they're the criminals, that's not been my experience. I've met some amazing people. They're way better than I am. I mean, like, they outshine me every single day. So yeah, I don't know if those people are out there. I think they're pretty rare.
Agreed. All right. Another question that came in is, as a member of Echo.Church, how can I or the church make immigrants feel more welcomed and supported through Echo Compassion? My grandparents were immigrants from Germany after World War II and had an American family sponsor who gave them land and other means to start a new life. Are there opportunities to sponsor immigrant families today? It's a great question. My family is actually very similar to this. I shared a little bit on Sunday, but my mom's parents came from Holland and Poland, and they were coming after the war to Brazil because there were people in Brazil offering free land for people that had been, that lost things during the war and so forth. So they came and were welcomed and settled in Brazil, which is where my family came from. And a lot of people ask this question, like, what can we do now? Is this still a reality? What would you say?
What can we do now about the land issue? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, like you said, how do we welcome, how do we as a church even make immigrants feel more welcomed and supported? Yeah. Maybe even through Echo Compassion. That was kind of like, for those of you that are new, it's our branch of Echo that does local and national and international ministry and support to others. So Lori helps lead that. So.
Oh, it's great. I would love to see us do something through Echo Compassion. We welcome anyone who wants to be involved more in this way. I work on the development. I'm the director of the development side. And so I have a woman on my team, Gracia Berrios, and I interviewed her actually for my podcast. She's a phenomenal woman who immigrated here as a baby from Peru. And she currently works with DACA cases here in California. And she, is also trying to explore other things we can do for some of the migrants, because she has some connections. I would love for us to build a team around something like this and just be the shining stars of welcoming all these immigrants into our area. I mean, one of the greatest things about being in the Silicon Valley for me is how many immigrants are here. We have people on so many different kinds of visas, right? We have H-1B, we have spouse visas, we have people on student visas, we have migrant workers, we've got DACA cases, we've got people who have, are undocumented. We have just all of it seems like. And so I would love for us to be known as Echo.Compassion, as an organization that's really shining in this area to help immigrants feel more welcome. We could do anything from providing, clothing if they come during a cold season, to helping people get started with food. We could do English classes. We could do, whatever you feel led to do. We welcome that in Echo.Compassion.
Any thoughts you would have? Practical? How church can make immigrants feel more welcome?
Oh, I would love to be a part of more of that. So
yeah,
thought of Echo.Compassion expanding in that area is really exciting to me.
I think one thing that is really practical is just inviting people into our homes to hear their stories. Mm-hmm. And I shared about this, but part of what developed my friendship with Andy and Stacy, our pastors at Echo, is, as a foreigner in college, you remember this too, when we were there, like there's a bunch of us that were all these from different countries. And when holidays came, we were like, where are you going? I don't know where you're going. Yeah, like we didn't have a home, right? Yeah. Like none of us had family. Nobody had a home. And there were some holidays that we were just like, let's hang out together. And there's a bunch of foreigners trying to, cook Thanksgiving meals. And it's terrible because we don't know what the heck to do. Or Christmas, we had several Christmases together where we chopped off some branches outside and called it our Christmas tree. And people began inviting us into their homes. And Stacy and Andy were some of those that spent many holidays with their family, where a bunch of foreigners are sitting and they opened their home for holidays, for dinners, for when hurricanes would hit Charleston. All the foreigners are everyone's going home. And we're like, where do we go? And there's only a few people that would raise their hand. Hey, you're welcome. And I think anytime we can open our home and hear stories and take a meal, really practical. It doesn't have to be sponsor a visa. It's just sometimes people just need to feel like they're human and that somebody cares enough to take that step toward them. So
yeah, I agree. I feel like I was welcomed so well that way. I've had so many breaking fast in Ramadan in Muslim homes. I've celebrated Diwali with Hindu neighbors. And when we were getting our master's degree, we lived in Mill Valley, which is North Bay. And we started a thing with San Francisco State University students, in the late 90s, where anybody who was here from another country that wanted to do a Thanksgiving meal together, a bunch of us got together and did that. And we invited them into our home. And Jason had a friend from Thailand. There was a guy from Taiwan, all these different places. And they said, they told us in our orientation here at San Francisco State that we would never go into an American home. Just forget that dream, because Americans don't do that. Oh. And we were like, no, that sort of lit a fire in us. We were like, well, we're going to solve that problem. So we got all these other friends to make sure they invited people to their homes for different reasons. But I have heard some of those statistics. We've had, world leaders that are now leading nations around the world who studied in the US and never entered an American home. I feel like someone said that Saddam Hussein may have been one of those. There's people that have gone on to lead nations and lived here and never entered an American home. It's a very practical way we can do that for people. But I would also add to it, if they have a holiday they're missing that they can't celebrate, try to let them celebrate that with you as well. So we had some friends over for Chinese New Year recently, did some hot pot with Singaporean and Chinese friends. And that's just a lot of fun. We like that holiday too. So that's another good one.
That's good. Yeah.
I think something to remember too in this, it seems small, but when you put yourself in someone else's shoes, it really helps you. If you've traveled somewhere and you've been new, and that's why I'm a huge advocate for global travel. And, that's probably what led us to be able even be in a relationship. Is I spent a semester abroad in college, came back, and it was actually the semester after that we met.
Yeah.
And so I think that experience put me in a place where I wasn't, I was for 5 months without other Americans, and I was in different languages. And so I think that experience really helps you put yourself in their position. And so you think of things different. And I think, my encouragement to Americans is travel more and see other places. If you haven't, then you don't know what it's like to be the outsider. And so if you don't have that experience, you don't know how your actions and simple things like what you're sharing mean so much and go a long way.
That's really good.
And if you've ever lived abroad, even more so, because what you're talking about, sharing your stories, people who have lived abroad, they miss their home and they want to talk about it. And if you get shut down and nobody's interested in it, it can be very isolating and depressing. So I think that a lot of immigrants in the United States must deal with a certain level of even low levels of maybe even PTSD around that, because it's traumatic. It's especially if you've walked all the way through Central America and you've probably left for some traumatic reason anyway, but you get here and you don't speak the language and you're treated sometimes not well. Life is hard. It's a real hustle just to survive. There's a lot of just embedded trauma in that. And we learned in working in tsunami relief in Indonesia, if you just let people tell their story, that in itself is therapeutic. We were made to share our stories as a way to heal. And so we can be a part of God's healing power with immigrants by just hearing about their life and seeing pictures and tell me about your family. Like, that means a lot to people.
That's good. All right. Hey, we should take some YouTube questions. Let me just acknowledge, so if you're logging in just now, thanks for joining us. We're talking about immigration and we're hitting questions that people already submitted. But if you got more, pop it in there. We see you with Dodo online and Dawn and William and Chris. So many of you. My dad's on there too, watching. Thanks for being here with us. A lot of you connecting. So if you have more questions, feel free to pop it in. A couple questions here that were submitted to already from YouTube. So one is, Filipe, what's been your biggest challenge with being a foreigner in America, especially earlier in life? It's funny they say earlier in life because I think I've gotten pretty Americanized over the years. I'll tell you.
I will say that when we met, he had a very strong accent, and there was many things that he's learned along the way.
I'm still learning. I'll tell you this. This is kind of a sad memory for me, but my first year in America, I was 11, and my parents moved. My whole family moved to New Jersey, and we
that's when you started learning English.
Yeah, and I didn't know anything in English. And one of the things that happened, and this talk about like learning, about immigrants. We moved to like a northern area of New Jersey where people were very white, very much not cultured. Like, so I'm a Brazilian. They put me in public school, and 11 years old. That's so 5th grade. It's like the worst possible age for you to start something new. I'm the foreigner. There were mostly white kids in school and some Hispanics. And they assume because I'm Brazilian, I speak Spanish, which I don't. I speak Portuguese. So the teachers would talk. I didn't know what they were saying. I remember many times people making fun of me, and I would try to say something. The teacher's like, hold on. And she'd get the Mexican kid to come out and try to talk to me. And I'm like, I don't speak Spanish. And they would say like, oh, you're Brazilian. They would clump me together with the Mexicans. Which nothing against Mexicans. I'm just not Mexican, And then on top of that, kids would just make fun of me left and right because they would say stuff like, hey, did you ride an elephant to school? Was your best friend a monkey? Because they thought of Brazil as like the jungle. And so they thought I was like a jungle kid. And then I remember a few times I was sitting there waiting for school, and they would come and like give me a Charlie horse. And I could not. Kids figured out I didn't know how to turn people in because I didn't speak English. So they could make fun of me. And so after school one day, they slashed my bike tires, and I rode my bike to school. And I was so tired of being bullied all the time. And I went to the principal's office, and I'm trying my best to tell them that kids slit my tire. But as you can imagine, if you don't know English, what do you say? So I'm trying to like put it not like knife, tire, like round. And the person in the office was like, I don't know what you're saying. And I had to walk away, and I walked my bike home because they couldn't help me. And I did, and the kids are laughing. And I mean, this is extreme. I was 11, and I hated that part of
but you
moving.
came from like a wealthy, like you weren't like, I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, it was just embarrassing. And
Yeah.
I think people sometimes forget what it's like to be in a place that you don't feel like you belong. And thank God, like in Silicon Valley, people know the world more, right? So we appreciate cultures. But when you go outside of places that are familiar with the world, sometimes you're really mistreated and belittled. And they take advantage of you. So that's my poor story there for you, whoever turned
These
that
are
one.
good stories for our kids to hear, because they're all teens right now. So to hear that dad went through way worse things, well, it feels bad in the moment for them too, but it's good.
But this is also I should clarify this. It's first world immigrant problems.
Yeah.
Like my immigrant problems are nothing compared to refugees and asylum seekers. My family was well off. I could go home to a healthy mom and dad that loved me, and brother, sister that care. We were together as a family through it all. So my little problem, it was big to me because I was little, but in comparison to what's happening with immigration now, with so many thousands of people, it's very little. And that's why we were talking about like lead with compassion, because there's a story behind every single person that you see as a number. And we talked about something, maybe we can actually bridge to this, because one of the political questions that keeps coming up is what is happening with the government in terms of asylum seekers. You see it in the news all the time. We watched the other day John Oliver talk about this. And I'll say I recommend John Oliver. But man, it was so sad. And what's happening is Trump has diminished the number of asylum seekers that can come into the country by a fraction. Now it's 15,000. When 4 years ago it was 80-something thousand. And then he wants to make it even smaller. And then on record this week, he went out saying the whole asylum process is a scam, and these people, they don't really want a new life. He was basically, and I'm not making political, I'm just saying what's happening, okay? Like, this is what he's saying, like I'm quoting him. And it's caused a lot of tension with asylum seekers. So anyways.
Yeah, there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear spreading. Michelle Ferrigno-Warren, that I interviewed on my podcast, who ran for Senate in Colorado and is a big, expert on immigration in Denver. One of the things that she said was, number one, we can receive them. We have the resources. So that's one of the misconceptions, is that we don't have resources, but we actually do. We can take about 750 a day at our port of entry. But, largely the asylum cases have been shut down. It's very hard to get asylum. So if you have a case of like somebody in Syria who's a Christian who's being persecuted, we just aren't receiving them by and large, we're not receiving them right now. And as a nation, that's just not been our history. We were founded on immigration, and, at least once the Puritans came, from that point on, the Native Americans, we've not done so well at treating them very well. And, but, from that point, when we wrote our Declaration of Independence and all these things, we've been very pro-immigrant until recently. It's been very, very different.
Yeah. So one of the questions on YouTube also, if you're just logging in, feel free to pop your questions in. We're addressing them one at a time. But one of them here, I don't know how to pronounce this name, but says, as a person who obeys the laws of our other countries, how should we accept people who break the law to come here? Plus, how do you stay as a nation if you don't have borders? Great question. There's another question that goes with this one, I think, kind of. What responsibility do immigrants have when immigrating to another country? Does not need to be inbound to USA? So sides of a question here. Say anything about that first?
I'll let you go first.
Okay.
You start.
Well, I'll just start by saying this. I do think, and in fact, we should just do a disclaimer here. The things we're saying just represent us, not necessarily even Echo as a whole. Like, not everybody would agree with us, even on our staff, possibly. But I would say that I think it's important to try to follow the law. So when there are laws for a reason, and the scriptures actually tell us to be respectful of those in authority, that there is some kind of sovereignty in how God appoints leaders. And in that context of when that was written, by the way, there was already some pretty evil authority in place with the Roman Empire. So it's not like they were saying respect authority when authority is godly. But I do think that there is a point at which the law of the land has to submit to the laws of God, or the ways of God. And so we should, like my dad and my mom, when we came to America, they tried really hard to do everything legal. And we did too. Yeah. When I became a citizen, I mean, the amount of paperwork. Oh my gosh. Do you remember this?
It's enormous. It's crazy.
Like piles and piles. And I didn't have a bunch of lawyers. I did almost all of it myself and with my dad and people that, love me. But it was a lot of work to be legal because I care about being legal. And I do think immigrants should care about the law. They should try to contribute to the country they're in. They should, if they want to be treated as a citizen, they should contribute like a citizen. So I think it's good to lay that out. But I'm going to flip this to you in this regard, Lori. I do think, though, that, and I had got more convinced of this over the last month, that the command to welcome immigrants and refugees in Scripture is so clear that I think it calls us actually at times to possibly have to break governmental laws in order to fulfill the scriptural mandate. And I don't know if I can say that it's like everybody should believe that, but I come to the conclusion for myself that if there is somebody who is here and they came illegally and they're a refugee and they need help and they maybe are illegally here, like I think it's our responsibility as Christians to love on them and to welcome them and to do everything in our power to champion their cause and even sacrifice our rights, like we talked about Sunday, to lift their value. And I know not everybody would agree with this, but
yeah, it's very complicated. It's very nuanced. I think that when it comes to things that aren't clear, I think it helps to start with what is clear. What is clear is that the Bible is telling us over and over again, orphans, widows, and foreigners or immigrants, to take care of them. Treat them like you treat citizens. Yep. It's very clear. We're supposed to love our neighbor as ourselves. That includes immigrants. I mean, we are not supposed to look down on them at all. That's not Christianity. It's not even Old Testament Judaism. It's just not part of our scriptures. God is very clear on this. So knowing that, that's really the heart behind it. That's the response, right? But like you said, I mean, that was one of the things I learned in my immigration series on my podcast was it is very hard to immigrate here, however you do it, whether you get married, that's a whole process. Both my brothers are married to women who were from other countries. My younger brother's married to a South Korean, my older brother's married to a Venezuelan. So we've seen them go through that process after getting married. And it's become even more expensive between when my older brother got married to his wife and my younger brother because of the laws changing. So the laws are constantly changing and making it what's already difficult, even more difficult. So, and then, the cases of DACA, the Dreamers, that's definitely a very tricky situation because, they came over as children. It wasn't their choice. They didn't choose to come, and we've raised them in our schools in the US. They are very patriotic citizens. A lot of times they're more patriotic than I am. They love this country. So many of them, they have a dream. They have the American dream. They want to make that happen. They work hard. It's just very well known in the Silicon Valley that immigrants by and large work very hard and very much want to be here, and they're not trying to destroy our nation. They're not criminals out to get us. They really do believe in this, and it's like giving them a chance. Like, have you ever been in a system that was so stacked against you just could not win? We've all been in situations like that, and if you can put yourself in that scenario, we should be the ones helping them. There were people that broke the law in Nazi Germany and harbored Jews in their homes. They were doing an illegal thing, but the Corrie ten Booms of the world and all these other people who civil disobedience, that was part of it. They saw people in need that may have died. And we have people who have come from very difficult situations, even in Central America. And those cases are really, from what I understand from my immigration lawyer friends, those coming from Central America right now, trying to get a court case, it's like almost always no. It's very difficult to get in right now as a Central American across our border in the ways they're trying. And yet they're fleeing horrible violence, gang violence, drug violence, political violence. There's a Nicaraguan, and Michelle Frigno Warren was telling me about. His brother was killed because he was against the government, and they had a hit on him. His family was like, leave or you're going to die. And he came, and we put him in jail for like 10 months, and he had this huge bond on him, or bail he couldn't pay. It's just really hard to be legal. And so that's why DACA is so important. Those laws are changing sometimes too. And so it's just very tricky. But what is clear is we need to welcome them, and we need to help change the system however we can.
Yeah, it's really good. One of the things that I saw in statistically speaking, the data right now is like, in fact, let me lay the foundation like this too. One of the things that angers me as a Christian that sees other Christians kind of paint a terrible picture of Christianity in the world. Like as a pastor, even I hate it when I read the news and I see like some televangelists that do something really stupid, or another pastor because what happens when one or two does something really bad,
Yep.
the news lifts all of that, and now it paints a picture that all pastors are
Yep.
like this.
Yep.
And I have to constantly fight that. And I hope that the world would understand, man, that does not represent all pastors. Like I am not a pedophile. I'm not whatever people think. I'm not. Like, I don't care. I'm not gonna steal your money. And even at Echo, like we have to be so careful when we receive an offering, because there are faith-based organizations that take advantage of people. So, and there's a wound inside of cultural Christianity and the world in terms of Christianity. And in light of that, what's happened too is there are some immigrants that have done bad things. But what happened is there are some people in power that have lifted those stories so high, and it has painted all immigrants, or the majority of immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers and migrants, as evil people that break the law. And 3/4 though of immigrants in America are legal. And with even refugees, we talked about this, 80% of the refugees that have come in over the last few years have been Christians running for their lives because they're being persecuted. So they're not even of other religions like it's painted it is. And it's okay if they are, but you're often painted the opposite, right? Yeah. And so there's this mindset that all immigrants are criminals. And I think it's really important for us to remember that it's not true. And you said this, Lori, but for you to get to this country, it's hard. So whether you're doing it legally or illegally, it's super, super hard. You're risking your life. So if you're going to risk your life to come into a country, you're going to come here with a lot of gratitude. Like you're going to want to work your butt off because you've got opportunity now. So the majority of them are not criminals. The majority of them, legal and illegal, they want to do good and they want to rebuild a good life. And there are some that have unfortunately painted a bad picture for all, and then there's some in political worlds that lift those bad pictures up so high that it makes us look like all of them are like this.
Yeah.
But it's not. All right, another question that came up, and this is kind of the opposite side here. How do you deal with people who are not friendly to immigrants?
That's hard.
You want to do it first?
That is hard.
No, that's harder. No. I mean, it's kindness. Lori, you said it at the beginning,
Everyone.
As Christians, that's what we're called to. We're called to be kind, and Jesus calls us to love our enemies. And so it's easy to love and be kind to those who are nice to us. It's another level of faith to love people who, in our faith are not with us. But I think that's kind of, I don't know, it's one of the highest callings that Christ calls us to. And so, repay evil with kindness.
Yeah. I mean, these other questions related, it's, what do you think about the wall? And this is where there's a lot of argument. And I would say maybe this is where both sides should manage the tension a little better, because people that are really against the wall can sometimes portray a hatred toward people that are, and they cast this image like, if you want a wall, you're a racist and anti-immigrant, which is not true. There are people that want the wall for good reasons and people that don't want the wall for good reasons, and vice versa. And so I think that's where the attitude behind it is way more important. And we ought to love each other on both sides and listen versus just want to be heard. So what's your perspective on the wall, Lori? I don't think
I have a very strong perspective on the wall. I'm an Enneagram 8, so I have a lot of strong perspective. Nobody's surprised. So my family lives near the wall. I've seen the border. I've crossed it multiple times. I know people who've gone back and forth a lot. To me and most of my family, and our perspective is the wall is a bit pointless because there are tunnels under the ground. We all know this on the border. So if your whole point is trying to keep supposed criminals from coming in, you would have to close all the tunnels and find all the tunnels. I mean, there's people all the time that are appearing in, like, I don't know, San Diego. It's like, how'd you get here? Oh, there's these very decked out, air conditioned elevators, tunnels so it's not serving, I don't think, the purpose. I think the money should be spent in ways that are more productive.
Like,
Because people can still climb over the wall and still, I mean, I don't think it's serving the purpose it intended to.
so what should the money be spent on that would be better than the wall?
I would love to see us spend it on either opportunities. If we're going to charge, for example, very high prices of bail, for example, this guy from Nicaragua that was fleeing violence because he had a hit on his head and he has no way to pay because he's not here legally. He's incarcerated on the border and has those ankle bracelets that are whatever, however much money per day. And it's crazy. Like, why don't we spend that money either if we're going to charge the bail and like, opportunities to pay the bail for him, if that's what we choose to do, or just programs where we actually help invest in. I would say there was a great program under the previous administration that I have a good friend from college who is living in Brunei, and she started working there on a government paid for by the US government, where all these Southeast Asians would come together and learn English and they could teach them positive things even about America and events. It was sponsored through the US Embassy and all these different things. It was a way to educate people and nation build for our country overseas in a way to make us, hospitable even overseas. I think that those kind of programs where we're actually helping people to have better opportunities and jobs and teaching them the lingua franca of the day, which is what we all speak in the United States. And I think those programs, helping immigrants learn English, helping them have a better start. If we want people to love our country, we will win them over by treating them well. If we tick them off, that will not go well for us. And I am a bit terrified of the children who've been incarcerated and separated from their families that are still currently separated. I can't imagine the memories they're going to have of what it was like to enter this nation. So I think that we're making enemies more than we're making friends. So I would love to see wall money spent on helping the poor who are desperate and need it.
So I know some godly Christians that here's their comeback that they would say, okay, you really believe that a country without borders is better. Would you be willing to live in a house that kept an open door all the time? Like, why would you want that for the country? But you want to protect yourself in your home. Why not just keep your home open then? Because it's the similar principle and it's a reasonable thing to say. I mean, what?
Yeah, no, I've heard the same thing. I'm not an advocate of open borders. I think we do need to check people. I mean, every immigration I've gone through in any country in the world, I show my passport. Like, that's normal. And they can either take me in and interrogate me, which has happened, or they let me through. And my white privilege most of the time lets me through. But I look like this, right? I'm in this skin. This is the body God gave me. But I ride in the same car with people who don't look like me, even into the state of New Mexico, because they have border checks, even not just on the US border with Mexico, like the El Paso Juarez border, but all the way up into New Mexico, which is north of Texas. And then well into the state of New Mexico, there are random border checks, which is not even a border with another country. They're looking for people. And so if it's just me, that people look like me in the car, we don't ever get really interrogated. But if you have people who have brown skin in the car, there's always a lot of questions. I mean, it's just how it works, right? I'm not an advocate of we should never stop people at a border, but I do think we've gotten a bit excessive on how we do it. And I would like to see us, if people really do want to come here and they need help, that we would fulfill our commitments that we've said we would do with refugees and asylum seekers at the very least.
That's good. All right. Hey, if you're just logging in, by the way, we're on immigration. And if you have questions, pop it into the YouTube channel here. We're addressing as many as we can as we go. We got about 15 minutes left of conversation. So come on and post your questions if you like. There's a couple more here I'm going to read. This one is from Dawn. She says, how do we get involved as a community to make sure that the policies that affect our immigrant community have their voices be heard and not silent?
Mm-hmm.
It's so difficult.
Yes, but so good.
Yeah, I'm curious how you would respond to that, Lori.
Yeah, I just think that anytime we make a policy, whether it's as a government, as an organization, as a family, any policy or rule that we make that affects someone else, we should always have a way for them to speak their voice into it. Because it's just going to be a bad decision if we're not taking their perspectives into account. We can make some really bad decisions if we don't hear from the people who are affected by it. And so, yeah, we will only lead better as a nation when we listen more and we allow more diverse voices to speak in. So, yeah, I mean, I'm happy to go translate if somebody speaks Spanish and they need their voice heard. I'll be right there. I actually did that for a friend recently. I had to go to court with her, a Colombian friend, and I was there with her to support her in case she needed it. But yeah, those are really important things. I think we need more of that.
Yeah, and we are in a week to vote now too, and every time there's a voting opportunity, there are people that we are electing that represent one or another side of this issue. So when you understand it better, it helps you have a more educated perspective that's compassionate toward immigrants and not just always pushing away, which actually leads me to this other question on YouTube. So this came from Tim, and it says, apart from the unknown, what do you think is the source of the fear people have toward immigrants? So this is a really important one, because I think this is a huge reason why so many people have been like pushing away. And even the president, he's, the way he communicates right now has caused people to be very fearful of immigrants. And maybe sometimes it's with reason, according to what he says, but there is a component of it that's very real. And on Sunday, we hit on this a little bit, that what we tend to do is we want to protect our comfort, and we want to be more about our rights and our comfort and our privilege. And we end up forgetting that what got us here was someone else's sacrifice. And we talked about this on as well, that even like in the Israelites, the verses we read about immigrants, how God would often remind them, like when they're getting comfortable in their land and they're like, no foreigners here, he would remind them, hey, welcome the foreigners, because you, meaning your ancestors, were once one of them, and they were mistreated and they wished they were welcomed. So treat these as your own. And I think that's really important to remember, that, you know, a lot of times it's based on, we don't want to lose our comfort.
Yeah. I think too, something, Laura, you mentioned before that I think really applies here is to hear people's stories. The more stories we hear of people who don't look like us, you know, our perspective is often shaped by the news. So, you know, 1 or 2 or, 10% of a certain ethnic group, the way the news portrays those people is how we think they all are, good or bad. And so if we don't take steps to actually engage with people who are different from us and have different stories, then it won't shift our perspective of those people. And I remember not too long, I mean, it was probably a while ago, because it's been a while since we've traveled with our whole family, but there was a time, and I felt like God used this in my heart to really challenge me, and I felt convicted. We were with our kids, and I don't know where we were going. It was probably back from Brazil, but I remember being in it was a big airplane, so it was probably Brazil here or something. But I was sitting in an airplane, and Ephraim, it was me and Ephraim. I think he was with some of the other kids. We probably had a couple rows because there's 7 of us. So it was fun. But I just remember this one leg, and there was a Middle Eastern man on the other side of it. It was me, Ephraim, and him. And because of stories and things that people, that there was some like a fear in me. And I remember sitting there and saying, I don't like that I feel this fear. It really, it bothered me more that I felt it than pushing it away and trying to act like I wasn't afraid. And so I just remember throughout that flight doing everything I could to engage with him in just little ways. You're in a flight. So it wasn't like we didn't have a long conversation, but he would give Ephraim attention. And I just remember feeling like, okay, I don't want to see you as a fearful person, but if I don't take a step towards you, and if I sit here in this whole flight and think that that you have ulterior motives, I'm going to think that, and this whole experience is going to be based out of that fear. And so that was just one example for me that God really used to shape, like, no, treat him like he's
Yeah.
just like you are. And it
Good.
was helped me at the end. I felt like I was praying half the time, like, okay, God, I'm not, but help me overcome this fear that I'm feeling right now.
Yeah, it's a good prayer. I think it's a really good example that you shared that story, because it's that whole thing. When you feel the fear, you want to replace it with something else because you were convicted by the Holy Spirit that was wrong, and you want to have this perfect love cast out fear, and God can teach you to love your neighbor. I think one of the things I really like on the evangelical immigration table, that's a really great resource for all of you. Several of my podcast people that I interviewed mentioned that. And they have a blog on there called Tell a Better Story. Alan Cross also writes a lot of things with that hashtag. And it just helps you reframe in your mind. Because if you're only seeing stories in the news about people that look a certain way, for example, Middle Easterners on planes, you might want to see a different story about a Middle Easterner with their family having a great time on a plane. Like, you need different stories because there's more than one story. And that's how stereotypes work, right? We just have one version of what that person should look like. And so that's really helpful. I'd also say one of the things that Michelle Ferrigno Warren on my podcast talked about was, there's even in the story in the Old Testament, for us, the Jewish people would refer to it as the Torah, and Muslims call it the Taurat. But this story about Moses and being in Egypt, and the Egyptians started to get nervous when all these Israelites started having a lot of babies. It's like, oh, wait, you guys were just a small group and now you're a big group. And so there was a lot of fear. And that's just, it can be human nature, just like what you felt, but we must find ways to overcome that. And so her book is called The Power of Proximity, which I would recommend. She lives in a zip code in Denver that's very diverse. She on purpose moved there with her family so she could be around the diversity of immigrants and know them personally, so that when she's advocating for them, she has faces and names of people that she knows she's talking about. And I think that helps to get to know people, lots and lots of people that are different from you.
That's good. One other comment on this topic that I think is really important before we probably have one more question to address. I think one of the biggest dangers of our day, and there's a lot of conversation around this too, is this idea of nationalism or Christian nationalism, which if you're not familiar, you should look this up. Because I think what's happening in our country here in America, and there's actually around the world even, there's this perspective that is pretty dangerous in my opinion, which is that we, a lot of, and I'm talking to followers of Christians here for a minute, not necessarily, what did I say?
Followers of Christians.
Not Christians, follow Christians, follow Jesus. Followers of Jesus that have committed to follow him and are born again into the kingdom of God, that it's really important to remember that our allegiance is to a heavenly kingdom before it is to a physical nation. And there is this tendency to protect the nation because of this philosophical and sometimes theological belief that the way that we advance the kingdom of God is by creating a nation that's a Christian. Yeah. And it's good to remember that is not the gospel. It's not the message of Jesus or the mandate of Jesus. The responsibility to take Jesus to the world is the churches. It's the people. And we do that by heart-to-heart connection, by helping people get to good news by through heart transformation, not through an outward force of political agendas and national agendas. And the way that the kingdom advances is by us loving people and sharing the good news with individuals, not by trying to make U.S. a Christian nation. And every time that's happened historically, it has led to bad things like the Crusades and things like that, where Christians are trying to enforce their faith politically into people, which never works, has never historically worked. When you try to say, we want to have a bunch of Christians by making it a Christian nation and making everybody believe in the 10 Commandments and in schools and in walls and make sure we have our rights protected. Like, none of that has ever led to a faster kingdom expansion. In fact, the opposite tends to be true. Where nations that are not Christian nations that persecute Christians tend to have faster gospel advancement than those that try to make it as a Christian nation. And it's good to remember that our allegiance as followers of Jesus is to Jesus, is to a heavenly kingdom. And that is first. And I say this even as a Brazilian. Like, I do not love Brazil more than I love my God. And I love my country and I love America. I don't care. I mean, Brazil won't always exist and America won't always exist, but the kingdom of God will. And I think our goal is to take as many people as possible to that kingdom versus protect our physical nation. And it's a big perspective shift for us.
And it's a much better kingdom. I mean, I find such comfort as a Christian that knowing that Jesus is king, and underneath Jesus, we are all the same. Like there's no hierarchy here. There's no I'm better than you. Immigrants, citizens, documented, undocumented, Muslim, Christian, Jew, we're all just here, right? And we're human beings, and there's just one king, and that's it. And a theocracy in the United States, it's just, we shouldn't even be trying to go that direction. I agree with all the things that you're saying. We have a diverse nation. So I have been a minority most of my life living in other countries. I lived in a Muslim area with Sharia law where I covered my head and I didn't eat pork and I obeyed all their laws. They weren't my own personal convictions, but I did those because of where I lived. And so if they had required me to pray like a Muslim and that had been the law, that would have been a line I wouldn't be willing to cross, but they never asked me to do that. So I wouldn't want somebody to impose their religious practices on me no more than we should be doing that on other people as when it comes to laws in a nation.
That's good. Any final words or thoughts to share with our audience before we unplug? I have one more thing, but let me go first to you guys. Do you have anything else you would add? Like, big deal, think about this.
I mean, it goes back to, I think, 3 things I can summarize this whole conversation is pursue being kind to people, listen to people's stories, and when you can get a chance to go and be an outsider in another place, take it, because I think that'll really shift perspectives of what it's like to be an outsider when you are one.
That's good.
Yeah. I really liked thinking about what is a small thing I can do and a big thing I can do. So that's a question I would hope everybody's asking themselves, like a micro level that you could help change something, and then a macro level. Small things are just like what we mentioned, inviting people into your home. Maybe we can help like somebody walk through a process, or maybe pay for an immigration lawyer for them. Those are expensive. A macro thing you could do is actually become an immigration lawyer. There's some really good women and men out there on the front lines helping immigrants, and they give heart and soul to this work, and they believe so passionately in it, and they studied many years and diligently to be advocates for justice for these immigrants. And it's a beautiful thing. Or even running for a Senate or, local or national. We need people in our government who follow Jesus and take seriously this command about immigrants. And I think we need people advocating for them at the highest levels to change our systems, because at some level you can only do so much with a certain amount of people. Even one church is limited. At some level you need to gather together in a bigger way, and that's why government exists, and we have, in the United States at least, we have the freedom to do those things. So maybe there's somebody watching that feels God calling them to do that and advocate on a systemic change level.
That's awesome. And Lori, one last thing. I know you said in the beginning, but remind people of your podcast name again, because it's a great resource if you came in halfway. Dive deeper. There's a lot of great interviews on this issue that goes way deeper too. So what is that called?
It's called A World of Difference, and you can find it on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It's in a lot of different places that podcasts are found. I would also recommend Evangelical Immigration Table. They have a lot of resources on their website. And then also Missio Alliance is an organization my friend Lisa Rodriguez-Watson just became the national director of, and they have these conversations with Christians. And she's a daughter of immigrants from Cuba, and she brings heart and soul to that whole conversation too.
That's awesome. I want to share one last thought with you guys as well. This is a political week with a lot of tension, and a lot of people have anxiety and stress and fear around what's going to happen. I heard today some people say, man, I really think the country's going to be in riots and whatever happens. And I just want to remind you that even if you don't follow Jesus yet, to take a step in that direction, because at the end of the day, politics and governments and countries and leaders come and go. But what Jesus does is he brings peace in the midst of storms. And there's this verse in scripture that says, Christ in you, the hope of glory, which means there is hope that can be internal in us through our relationship with Jesus that transcends what culture is going through. This is why Christians around the world that are persecuted hold firm to their faith and still have peace when they are being, family members are taken away from them, when they're in the midst of jail. When you read about Paul and Peter being in jail cells and telling others about Jesus, singing hymns in the midst of being in shackles on their wrists and hands. And the ability to have joy and peace in the midst of turmoil is actually what defines those of us that follow Jesus and have the Spirit of God in us. And it's a good reminder this week to be at peace, to know that God is way bigger than political leaders. And regardless of how this turns out this week, our hope for glory, like our hope for peace and our hope for better things, is not in this world. It's in Jesus. And when we take a step toward him, that's what allows us to make it through these weeks. And that's brought me great comfort during these days. I was stressing for a while, and I felt the Lord reminding me, even in that passage in Jeremiah 17, he says, blessed are those who trust in the Lord, whose confidence is in him. Our confidence is not in a new president. Might be good, might be bad. Our confidence is not in a Christian nation. Our confidence is in God. And if we hold on to that, we're going to be all right. So we'll leave you with that thought for tonight. Thank you for being here. Share this with those in your platforms, your social platforms. Spread the message. Let's be a people that unify, that bring love to this conversation and compassion, and maybe hold the tension so that we can be right in the middle there and not take sharp political views that sometimes cause more hatred and division. So God bless you all. Hope you have a great rest of your evening. We'll see you next time. We're kicking off a new series this Sunday at Echo, so you might want to check it out, by the way.